Hello and welcome back to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here, and today I'm going to be sharing with you how I painted this desert scene with mountains in the background. As is often the case, this demonstration is a studio vlog that I'm sharing with you as I experiment with my drawing techniques, shading techniques and colour choices. And as always, I hope you'll find it helpful and that it will encourage you to try some similar experimentation for yourself. But first, a quick peep at my new book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Tips and Techniques for the Complete Beginner, which is now available to order or pre-order, depending on where in the world you are and which shop you choose. So let's get back to the demo, and the first step is to pencil in my mountains and my sort of sandy, rocky dunes in the midground and the foreground. This is going to be an ink and watercolour painting, in other words, line and wash, or some people call it pen and wash. So I'm sketching it out first in pencil, and then as soon as I'm happy with my pencil sketch, I'm going to go over it with waterproof fine liners. The fine liner I'm using here is a Faber-Castell Pitt pen, and it's a 0.5 nib. These pens are lovely. They're filled with Indian ink, and so they make a lovely mark on the page, and you can get them in all kind of different nib widths. I can go in and fill in some of the darker areas using either a brush pen or the calligraphy pen, which has got a nice wide chisel nib. I'm trying to make sure I get in some shading so I know where my darkest darks are, and also trying to bring in some mountain texture, trying to show the directionality of the slopes of the distant mountains without adding too much detail, and then trying to add some shading which will give me suggestions of the shapes of the dunes and rocky outcrops. If I can get some of these nice darks in, it gives me a bit of a head start when I come to paint the painting. Then the paint will provide my mid values and some of my light values, and any areas of unpainted paper or very light value paint will give me my lightest values. See, I'm taking my time with this because I want to try and make sure that I get quite a lot of the indications of the strata of the mountains and the directionality of them indicated with my line work. So here's the finished line work. I'm now just going to try and work very lightly across it. I'm going to use Winsor Blue for the sky, and I'm going to paint it using the wet in wet technique. This means wetting the sky all over and the distant mountains because they will be darker than the sky, so I can bring the sky colour over them using a large mop brush. This is a size 18 or a size 20, I'm afraid I can't remember, and it's Skoda Ultimo synthetic mop brush, and this is Winsor Blue. I want a very sort of pale streaky sky, so I shall work with horizontal brush strokes, trying to leave some paler areas, but trying to bring a little bit darker colour later and bring that colour over the mountains so that will give me a good underpainting to be able to show the mountains in deep shadows. And I've changed here to my 1.5 inch Princeton Aqua Elite modeler, and I'm bringing some of those same shadows with this same colour, Winsor Blue, across in a very pale, light value across the sand in places. And that again will give me an underpainting that, because of the transparent nature of watercolour, when I glaze over that pale blue on the sand, it should give me just automatic shadows and some sort of idea of the lay of the land, if you see what I mean. So coming in with slightly brighter Winsor Blue, and cleaning off the brush and lifting out a little bit of that blue again so I get my streaky sky. I now need to let this underpainting dry completely. So here's the dry painting, and I'm going to now glaze over the sand. It's very important with the glaze that you make sure that your underpainting is completely bone dry so it doesn't lift. Now this is a mixture of raw sienna and raw umber with a tiny touch of blue. You can see that it's going over, this wash is going over the, excuse me, the underpainting, and the underpainting is showing underneath where I placed it for shadows because of the transparent nature of watercolour, and it's already starting to give me some really lovely but subtle sand effects. And I can add slightly darker versions of that same colour that was mixed with raw sienna and raw umber. I can add a little bit more, a touch of the Windsor blue and a touch of burnt sienna to it to darken it up, and maybe even a touch of Payne's grey if I need it. I can begin to come over my mountains. I want to get enough variety in these mountains, variety of value as well as colour, in order to make them look interesting and so that it looks as if these mountains are going off into the distance. This is where my line work comes in useful, because I've marked out the individual outcrops of each part of the mountain, if you see what I mean. So I can keep a little bit of separation between each peak and slope. And I can make sure that my washes become paler the further back I go, because paler, cooler colours will recede and darker, richer colours will come forward. So I'm looking for recession with my mountains. Eventually I shall warm up the closer part of the mountain with a bit of burnt sienna and some lovely, really dark tones. But for now, I think there's enough separation now between those mountains that the illusion of distance is beginning to be created. This is a clean damp brush. I've squeezed all the water out of it, and I'm lifting out a bit of the paint across the crest of some of those sand dunes and then wiping back as well with a tissue in places. This gives me highlights on the sand where it looks as if those areas are in bright sunlight, and it stands out nicely against, or it contrasts well with the darker colour of the mountains. And as I'm building up these dunes in this rocky terrain, I'm now going to introduce just a little bit of sap green with a bit of burnt sienna to make it a bit more of an earthy green. And I'm dabbing it here and there just to introduce the look of some scrubby desert plants growing here and there on the top of these sand dunes. Because the wash is still wet, this colour should just diffuse into the sand colour and just give me just this sort of little bit of a green glow that really will add so much to the scene. Now I've covered the sky and the mountains with a piece of paper. This is known as soft masking. This will protect the sky, and I'm going to create some spatter patterns for extra texture across the foreground using my fan brush and my darker dune colour. I'm dipping into some burnt sienna as well for this. The paint has to be an inky consistency, and then just tap the brush and it releases the little spatters, which should softly diffuse into the damp paint and just give me a little bit of subtle foreground texture. Removing the mask, you can now see the difference between the foreground textures and the less detail in the middle ground and background. I'm now going to let this layer dry completely. The colours are quite a bit brighter than they look here. It's a sunny day in my studio, and that tends to wash the colours out. But what I'm going to be doing next is using my waterproof fine liner, my 0.5 nib Faber-Castell Artist Pip Pen, to add some more line work detail to the existing line work. I've sped this up a little bit because it can take a little while, but what I'm doing is integrating the marks into the washes a little bit more, adding some more texture, some more value, some more shading where I think it needs it. There's no rules that say that you have to do the line work first and then the washes and that you can't go back in. I think it's really important to feel that you can use any media on your paintings in any order that you want. Anything goes to create the effects that you want to see. And of course, with experimentation, it's really good if you just follow your hunches, your instincts and your ideas about what's going to work. And I hope you can see that as I add more texture and more darks and integrate some of the marks into the painted washes, that it begins to come to life even more. Sort of a balancing act, really, to balance out the line work and the washes. Of course, if you are happy with the line work, then you don't need to go back in. And sometimes, if you're using paint that's not quite as transparent as some colour types, then you may need to go back in over your line work, as the washes will sort of dull that line work down a bit. And now to finish the painting off, I'm going to get some really nice darks, but they're going to be much warmer, and I'm going to put them across my mountains with the warmest colours, with the mountains that are closest to us, getting a little bit cooler as we go further back, but bringing some lovely variety and warmth to this scene. And then I'll bring some of that same warmer colours across and glaze them across the midground and the foreground in places, just to really bring the painting to life. And I can really gently dab out a little bit of the damp paint with my tissue, just again to give me a few little highlights or textural marks. And I'm now going to use the palette knife, and I'm going to scrape back a little bit of texture into my foreground, a few directional lines, scraping back to the underpainting underneath. These will give me some highlights, some texture, but also some suggestions of a bit more detail and terrain in my foreground. I can then add a little bit of darker paint around those marks too if I want to. And that just builds up tone, shadow and texture. And I think I'm quite happy with this as an experiment. I'm going to remove the tape. Removing the masking tape shows us how the painting looks with a clean white border, almost as if it was a finished painting in a matte mount or frame. And this can help us to see any imbalance or anything sort of pop out that we need to rectify. But I don't mind this. I'm quite happy with this as an experiment. I'm really pleased with the warm tones that I have in the closer mountains that become cooler, so that the mountains then recede into the distance. And I like the way the line work and the washes work well together here. These colours in these final frames will show you the real colours, how they look in real life, less washed out. And I'm hoping that what I've got is the subtle colour of the deserts, the deep shadows, the textures, the subtle play of light on the sand, and also that delicate flush of green from those desert plants. Well, I hope you found that helpful. If you enjoyed the video, then please give us a thumbs up. And if you are a new viewer, then we'd love it if you would subscribe to our channel. It's free to do, and it really helps us with the YouTube algorithm. And thank you so much to everyone that supports us on Patreon. We appreciate each and every one of you. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.